This episode contains mentions of graphic or sensitive material that may be triggering. Listener discretion is advised.
Crime Junkie AF. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show made by the Crime Junkie, Ashley Flowers, for those who are Crime Junkie AF. I am so excited because I am back again with another special guest and a special case, especially to me, for you guys today. The Burger Chef murders is one of the most infamous and mysterious cold cases here in Indiana. It has remained unsolved for over 40 years, and Crime Junkies specifically might know it because of a short little series I did very early on in my podcasting days called Red Ball that only covered Burger Chef. And while I was kind of like, reporting's not the right word because mine was a story more about what does it take to like relook at a cold case. But while I was there reporting for my story, I ran into a group who was filming for a documentary at the same time about Burger Chef. And that documentary has just come out. I am so excited to be joined today by one of the co-writers, co-directors, Luke Rynderman. Hi.
Hi, Ashley. I'm so excited to be here as well.
This is amazing. It feels like a lifetime ago. And it's so funny because at the time, again, you guys were filming, podcasting moves so fast, and mine was just like 4 short episodes.
Yeah.
But I kept waiting and I kept waiting, and I was like, am I making it up? I know there was a film crew there. But there's a lot of reasons that your guys' film took a long time.
Yeah.
You guys have some incredible information. So I don't want to waste another minute.
Yeah.
Let's jump in.
Yeah.
So Luke, before we jump in, for people who are not familiar with the Burger Chef murders, or what in your documentary is called the Speedway Murders, can you give them the rundown? What is this story that you told?
Yeah. The Speedway Murders is about the disappearance and subsequent murder of 4 employees at the Burger Chef restaurant in 1978, where the 4 employees, Ruth Shelton, Jayne Friedt, Mark Flemmonds, and Danny Davis, were all taken out of the back door at closing time and then found about 48 hours later in Johnson County, which was a forested area about 40 minutes away, all murdered in sort of different ways. And our film covers the 2 hours or whatever that, the mystery of what happened in that time.
It was still a mystery all these years later. And there's been so much talk and so many different theories, and you cover a lot of them in the documentary. And it wasn't just you. So you have a partner in all this, yes?
So my partner, Adam Camion, who is more of the investigative side, let's say, and I'm, a bit more kind of, I guess, storytelling / visual sort of. My background is primarily in production design. So, so we sort of, but I am the true crime junkie, I must say that. So we worked very well together and he couldn't make it because he is in Australia. You happened to be here for a little bit. You stayed a little longer just to do this, so thank you. Yeah.
And you are, obviously our listeners can hear, from Australia as well.
Yes, very Australian.
It begs the question, how on earth, it was the question I had the first time I saw you guys, how on earth do 2 guys from Australia end up at this case in a small town in Indiana from 1978?
I initially learnt about it, I think it was the Unsolved Mysteries website or a very old episode of Unsolved Mysteries.
Really?
Yeah. And I was in China at the time. Yeah. Like classic.
Robert, so is it a Robert Stack episode?
Robert Stack.
The good one.
I was going to say classic Robert Stack. Just kind of saw, I think it was initially the 4 photos of the yearbook photos, which are sort of widely put out there. And it just kind of captured my imagination. And I remember it, sending it to Adam, and we'd just come off we'd written a script for a horror film that was kicking around, that wasn't sort of going anywhere, and we were sort of looking for the next thing, and I sent it to him, and he just was like, I said, do you think this has got anything? has it got legs? And he wrote back straight away, just being like, fuck yeah, and so, and so there, from there, we, like it just captured us, and we haven't really come up for air since.
Mm-hmm. Is this the first true crime doc you guys have done together?
It's the first anything we've done it's the first film that we've done. So, yeah.
You picked a difficult one.
Yeah. We don't, yeah.
What was it like trying to get I just know what it was like for me to try and get a couple of interviews. And I'm like a local person from Indianapolis who worked with Crime Stoppers.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine emailing someone or calling someone from the other side of the world being like, do you mind if we show up and look at what you got?
To be honest, I think the Australian thing and coming from an outside perspective was really helpful.
Really?
Yeah, really. I feel like it opened doors for us.
Great.
Like an example of that is the press conference where I do remember you there, and I don't know if we actually met.
I don't think we actually spoke.
Yeah, which was just crazy. But I remember we were running 5 minutes late for the press conference for some reason because we got lost or something. And I remember we walked in and somebody was like, okay, we ready to start? They're here. So like the whole press conference kind of waited for us to get there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew you'd come a long way.
Yeah. So, so to go back, initially Adam found a Facebook group and there's quite a lot of them. I don't know, as you probably know, there's quite a lot, and they're very vocal community. And Adam originally got in with one of the groups, and then I think we first reached out to Ruth Shelton, who's Ruth's sister, and she was the first person that agreed to do an interview. Okay. And I think we did a pre-interview on Zoom. Well, this is pre-Zoom, so however.
There was some way we were communicating. Yeah, Skype, that was it.
Yeah.
I forgot about Skype. Yeah. They really dropped the ball come COVID.
Yeah, Zoom really took it. So she was sort of the first one. And then we initially, I think we saved $10,000 and hired a DP and just got on a plane and came here and started to interview people. And that was for the 40th anniversary. And we knew that we wanted to be there for that because there was the tree planting ceremony as well as the sort of famous press conference with the knife and stuff like that. So...
Well, so you guys just got on a plane and came?
Yeah, we just came on a wing and a prayer.
How long have you and Adam known each other to be in and like this together?
Yeah, we've been friends, besties for about 35 years.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah, just a lazy 35. And yeah, I mean, we were friends at school and we were both kind of nerds, and Adam initially kind of took me under his wing. He was the more confident one. Mm-hmm. And then, we were kind of into Dungeons and Dragons before it was cool, before Stranger Things. Mm-hmm. So I mean, we had that kind of relationship and trust, and and it just was an organic thing, and we started writing scripts together, and then that never went anywhere, and then this came along and we just went for it.
You can get lost in true crime.
Yes.
Did you guys find yourself really getting lost in this case? Did it become all consuming?
It still hasn't let go of us.
Really?
Yeah. Like even now still we were sitting down on, I think we were in LA on a Saturday night still arguing about how the crime scene was Mark's body in particular, which was found and what happened and all that. So yeah.
Well, let's get into it a little bit more, like in detail, so we can kind of explain for our listeners the case itself, and then we can kind of go into, because your documentary explores these couple of very prominent theories on what could have happened.
Yeah.
And then I also want to get into the way that you portrayed those, and the way you did your documentary was, I haven't seen anything else like it, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. Yes, it was so beautiful. So let's just talk about the case.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of gave everyone a high level. They are closing up this burger chef in November of 1978. It's closing time. Danny asks if he can stay late. He wasn't even supposed to close that night. And someone ends up coming by the restaurant later that evening who worked there and saw that the lights were still on. They weren't supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of starts setting off alarm bells. And they go inside, and there was some stuff remaining, right, from the kids?
Yeah, there was the Ruth and Jayne's handbags. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there was like the safe was open and money was missing. So...
But no signs of the kids, no signs really of a struggle either. The back door was open, is that correct?
There's different theories about how wide it was open, but the back door was definitely cracked open. And they weren't there.
And Jayne, she was the only one who had a car at the time, but her car was gone. Is that right? Or Danny had a car too.
Danny had a car as well.
His was there.
Danny's was there. So Danny had a station wagon, which is interesting as well because it would have been a bigger car.
Mm-hmm.
Jayne had a 1973 Chevrolet Vega.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it 74? Anyway. So her car was taken.
Right. So that's missing. So initially they're like, oh, there's thoughts that these kids like ran off, that they did this, that did they take the money? I don't know. Did they run and take off? They're just going to show back up. So much so that they ended up cleaning the restaurant.
Yeah.
Like nothing happened there, which is so frustrating. Maddening.
Yeah.
They end up finding Jayne's car though. And this is a part that like makes my brain itch because they find her car just a couple blocks away from the restaurant.
Yeah. So West 15th Street, it's a 5-minute drive, maybe 25-minute walk.
But it's parked across the street from a police station.
Yeah.
Do you think, what's your theory around that?
I mean, we have so many, and this is another point that me and Adam constantly talk about. So there's a few things that we've looked into. So the facts are that the car was found, it's a park called Leonard Park as well on one side. There's houses on the other. Police station is kind of almost around the corner, but still very close. We've looked into whether it was dropped off for someone that owned an illegal chop shop that was going to pick it up. The other interesting fact is that the keys were found in Jayne's pocket. And then the driver's side door was locked, but the passenger side door was open. So, I mean, whether she was with the car, there's just so many different things that we've looked into about how or why it was there.
Do you have a favorite theory?
Oh, we've ruminated so long over it. And I tend to think potentially she was with the car when it went there. Whether she drove it or not, I don't know. But the fact that the keys were in her pocket and then her door was locked, apparently she always locked her doors. And then whether someone picked them up from there and then went back to the restaurant. And
there's a handprint found on her car, right?
Yeah, there was a palm print it belonged to one of Mark's brother's friends who was cleared apparently.
Okay. So it ends up, they don't just show back up. They didn't just run off.
Yeah.
And people get more concerned. And then, do you want to talk about their bodies being found?
Yeah. So as far as I know, that Danny and Ruth were found pretty close together and they were almost touching, like their legs kind of and facing each other. And they were both shot pretty close range. And then Jayne was found a few meters away with 2 stab wounds to essentially the chest, heart area. And Mark was found further away and his body he'd almost fallen back on himself and subsequently choked on his own blood, which is also something that we've talked and tried to theorize. And
Mark is the one that I could just like spiral on. Because a lot of people say that, so they think that maybe the kids were driven out there because Johnson County is a ways away.
Yeah.
Johnson County's in the middle of nowhere, like where they're found. There are long driveways leading to residence, though. I mean, if you know the area, but it's the middle of the woods, 1978. It would have been pitch black.
Yeah.
The theory is, or the thinking is they were taken out of the van for some reason. And so many people say, like, the intention wasn't to kill them.
We don't think so at that stage. Like, we don't think that they would have driven or, and again, we always are like, why not just kill them there?
Yeah.
Like, if that's your intention, take them into the office or the storeroom.
Right.
Yeah. So we believe that at that point, they were trying to buy time or whatever, that it wasn't like their intention to kill them. So,
But something goes south and it looks like Jayne tries to run.
Yeah.
And she's caught. And then so many times I've heard people say Mark runs and people say he ran into a tree and fell backwards and that's what killed him.
Yeah.
But do you think that's true?
I mean, this is again what's maddening for us, and this is something that I really was like waiting almost my 5 years to talk to you about. I mean, I listened to Red Ball and as someone that has seen the crime scene photos, And again, it depends on who you ask, which investigator. We've spoken to subsequent.
They've all got different thoughts.
Yeah. We've spoken to two in particular who have both seen the crime scene photos. One of them describes it in our film, and the different with Jayne, the different. I mean, we just sort of heard recently from one of the investigators that he thinks Jayne didn't even know what was coming, that she was just walking. She wasn't even running. Yeah. And that they came over her shoulder.
Which is totally possible because they have no idea. There's nothing that I've ever heard that proves she was running or anything. And she was stabbed, not in the back, but in the chest.
Yeah.
So someone chasing her doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I mean, it's suggested that they came over her right shoulder and stabbed her twice, and she fell either with the perpetrator and fell onto the knife, and that's how the handle broke, which makes logical sense. But Mark is, it's just maddening as to what happened to him, and the different investigators sort of say that, it was a baseball bat or he ran into a tree. Another investigator says that it was brass knuckles because there was like ligature marks around the eye area.
I think the thing for me more than Mark running tree or however his injuries happened, the only reason I don't really believe the tree theory is because he didn't die from impact. He died from choking on his own blood. Yeah. And they made sure the other kids were dead. Yeah. So if he ran to a tree and then just fell backwards, why didn't they go? Yeah. Why didn't they shoot him? Yeah. How would they know that he wasn't going to wake up and tell people exactly what happened? Like, that's the part that doesn't line up for me.
That's the question. That's what doesn't make sense to us. We know from our theory, from the questions that we've asked, is that it was a frenzied attack. So both Danny and Ruth were shot multiple times, I think twice each. The chamber of the gun was emptied. Whether they fired at Jayne if she was running or Mark, we don't know. But it just, there's just so many questions around Mark's injuries and what happened and why didn't they go up? Why didn't they look for him? Yeah. Did they
find him?
Yeah. Did they wait for him to die? Did it happen first? We've theorized on that as well. Did Mark run away and then that's what caused the chain of events? And then we don't know. One of the investigators says that he was found next to a tree, right close to it. Another one says that it wasn't near a tree. It was a forested area. There would have been a lot of trees around.
Well, that's where I'm like, there's the area they were found in has a ton of trees. So honestly, I'm sure you could, again, I like clearing wise, I don't know if you could say any of them were found in a clearing, but there's trees everywhere. Yeah. Like they're not like on the side of the road and they're in the middle of these trees. Yeah. So it's always been said too, because, you've got a knife, you have Mark who ran to a tree or maybe was beaten, you have Ruth and Danny who were shot. There's always been this theory of multiple perpetrators. Yes. I don't think there's anyone who thinks one person did this.
I mean, we definitely believe that it was at least two people. Mm-hmm. At least it would have had to have been. Whether there was three, it depends on which theory you kind of like.
Subscribe to, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say one other thing as well. Yeah. So there was sort of one other suggestion that he was actually beaten with a chain, a part that came from the char broiler, which was the machine that cooked the burgers and the buns. That we've also heard that as well.
Why though? Like, was that missing?
I don't think so. It's actually a good question.
Because I've heard chain too, but I didn't know where that came from.
Yeah. I just got sent and just by speaking to so many people on it that apparently like there was a part of the char broiler that was significant with that kind of injury. That was whether it was missing, I don't know, but.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the theories because there are a lot that have come up over the 4 decades and some new stuff that you have found.
Yes. Yeah.
So walk us through some of the theories you had, because there were how many main theories? 4, right?
In our documentary, we explore 4, but ultimately there's, many more as well, but we decided to kind of hone in on the 4 that you hear the most. So the first theory is the robber gang theory, and that is a prominent theory that includes a group of guys who were going around robbing burger chefs and Kentucky Fried Chickens at the time, which had a similar MO to what happened, where they would come in, they would park their vehicle a little way away and then come in on foot and then go in the back door and rob the restaurant of the takings and then
Which
leave.
so far is like, it lines up, right? Back door is open.
Yeah. Yeah, so far so good. So they would, and then they would leave on foot and then they'd either take one of the employees' cars to their getaway car or they'd hot-tail it to their car.
And you've got Jayne's car that's been moved.
Yeah.
So that kind of works.
Yeah.
And the thing we didn't talk about were the 2 witnesses. And that's where they kind of come in. You want to explain that part?
So there was 2 witnesses that one of them was working at the Dunkin' Donuts, which was shared the car park, which was maybe, let's say, 20 what do you guys use?
Feet, but meters is fine.
20 feet. Yeah. Let's say 20 feet away. Yeah. So they shared the car park. There was a view from the Dunkin' Donuts to the Burger Chef. One of the employees who was working had knocked off, and she, along with one of her friends, was sitting behind the Dunkin' Donuts close to the railway tracks. The geography of this has always been a bit iffy to me. We've actually been to the site, and they were waiting for her dad to pick her up and smoking a joint. Yeah. And 2 men came up to them and told them someone was graffitiing in the area and to move along. And they
made it seem like they were police officers, right?
Yeah, they made them seem, like they thought it was a police officer.
Yeah, because they asked them for ID or something like that.
Yeah, someone authoritative.
Right.
And then, so through that, I don't know if I'm going on a tangent, but that's where the composites and the busts ended up coming from. The
bearded man and the clean-shaven man is who you'll always hear about in this case.
Yeah.
And it comes from those witnesses. And in the other robbery gang theory, in these other robberies that had happened, was it always 2 guys? Was it more than 2 guys?
Yeah. Usually it was 2 or 3.
Okay.
But there was other members of the robber gang that were interchangeable.
Okay.
Usually they came in with stockings over their faces.
Okay.
In this instance, for some reason, they didn't. And then...
they didn't for the... They didn't have the stockings on in the parking lot. That doesn't necessarily mean someone didn't have stockings on when they came into the Burger Chef.
Yeah, that's true. But then the theory is that...
Why kill them if they could...
Well, that Jayne potentially recognised one of them from when she worked at the Plainfield Burger Chef, and one of them potentially was someone that would frequent that, and then she recognised them, and then the situation escalated.
That's when everything went south.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were this group. They know who these men are.
Yeah, they're all named. They were, and again, depending on the theory, but the investigators of that theory actually got like cleanup statements from them, I want to say. And so they were known and they were spoken to, yeah.
And the other part that fits is they're supposedly from Johnson County,
correct,
where the kids' bodies are eventually found, where they were taken.
One of them lived or had a house out there, and they were very familiar with that area.
Which to me seems really important. And I think it's really important to investigators now. I don't know how important it was back then. It seems like back in the 70s and 80s, they spent a lot of time looking at the Burger Chef itself and maybe where Jayne's car was found. And really now everyone I've talked to has said, no, it's where their bodies are found that is important, that is probably tied to whoever took them there or did this.
Yeah.
So what about the robber theory doesn't fit?
So for me, the biggest hang-ups with it is that, so the car being parked, let's say they parked their car on West 15th Street, it's at least a 25-minute walk. Me and Adam have walked it. It's a long way to park and then walk to the restaurant to rob. And then the other one is...
And why would you park so close to a police station?
True.
That's always so weird to me. Unless you didn't know the area.
Yeah. But I mean... Yeah, that's true. I mean, would they have not? Yeah. I mean, if they'd scoped it out, though, they would have done their homework.
Yeah.
And then the other big kind of question mark is how did they get Jayne's Vega is a fairly small car. I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's a 2-door. Like, how do you get at least 2 or 3 grown men and 4 kids into that car and leave in it, where Danny's station wagon.
It's right there.
Yeah, why not take the station wagon? And then, going from, they'd never hurt anybody before, other than there was an incident where I think one of their guns actually went off accidentally and they shot someone in a convenience store who didn't die. Like, how do you go from never hurting anybody to a quadruple homicide?
It's a huge leap.
It's a huge leap.
It is. Like, if you're working it out in your head, the only thing that makes sense to me is that they do what they've always done and they get Jayne. Again, I don't know how they expect all the kids to stay back. I don't know if someone stayed with them, but they get Jayne to take maybe one of them to their car. And then that's when maybe Jayne, if the theory is right, Jayne recognizes the person. And they're like, okay, well, you're coming back with me now. But nobody ever saw another car there.
Yeah, that suggests another car, which we've never known about.
Never has been. Another car has never been part of this.
Yes.
There's plenty about a van.
Yes.
So you want to go to the next theory?
Yeah. The next theory is the Forrester conundrum, which involves a guy called Donald Forrester, who was prevalent in the area at the time, who was a known bad guy who was actually in jail for a violent rape. He was doing 95 years, and he confessed twice and then recounted twice. And then with the second confession, they couldn't get a conviction. And so it was...
So that one went all the way to actually trying to get a prosecution on it.
Yes, yeah. And then it was I think at the time they were sort of like, well, he was doing 90, he's not getting out anyway. Yeah. So Mel Wilsey, one of the investigators, they wanted to obviously get a... solve it for the families and that sort of thing. So,
and I think that where they kind of like landed on that, right, was that he got some time out from prison, basically. When he was confessing, when he was talking to investigators, like he got to leave the maximum security, right?
So his whole thing was that he was being treated pretty badly in maximum security wherever he was, and I think the deal that they would give him was that they were going to move him to a different prison, a less. Like a bougier prison.
As bougie as prisons can get in Indiana,
and that he was, so that, he would, and the theories as they go is that, he was sort of walked through some of the investigative areas and saw some of the crime scene boards and stuff.
So the stuff that he knew intentionally or unintentionally, he actually learned.
Yes.
Through his interviews with law enforcement.
And you can see, I'm sure, have you seen the confession? Yeah. So you can see that he's kind of being led.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is not an uncommon thing that you see in false confessions. And again, he comes out and recants.
Yeah.
Was there anything that was like, that really tied him to it?
He knew some things. And there was the shell casings thing that they, so they went to his house and they drained he had a septic tank so apparently he went back to the crime scene with his girlfriend and found shell casings that he took from there. And then the investigators drained his septics and they found the shell casings, but they didn't match the gun. And so, there was a lot of there was a lot of, what do you say?
Enough to make them look suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, enough to get police to take it seriously.
Yeah.
But nothing that tied him.
Yeah, nothing that physically tied him. So
yeah.
And he knew things, and it was entirely possible that he had heard a story or, that knew people that were involved because of what he knew.
Yeah.
But whether he was there, that's the sort of...
Is there anyone that still believes it's him that you ran into?
Well, we interviewed Mel Wilsey.
And he still thinks it's him?
Yeah, he was, he's like, we brought this to as close to a conclusion as we could. We, for all intents and purposes, did our jobs.
Yeah.
We got a confession, even though it was recounted. But, he knew enough to suggest that he was there.
So what's the third theory?
So the third is the Speedway bomber, which is an interesting one.
It really is.
So you can't really look at it, I guess, without looking at the Speedway bomber, which was, the first thing I think that came up when I was researching it was this theory, the Speedway bomber, there was a string of bombings, during 6 days in Speedway in 1978 prior to the murders happening. Brett Kimberlin was the lead suspect in the case. He was a main drug dealer in the area at the time. There was a woman called Julia Cyphers who was the mother of a woman he was seeing who was murdered at a home by an assailant. You vox pop anybody in the area and his name comes up.
And you guys actually got an interview with him. When I saw that part, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Because he's one of the only people still around from this story.
Yeah. He's not someone that does a lot of interviews. I think, our film's primarily the only film that has an interview with him in it.
How'd you get him to agree to it?
It was through someone that we were working with at the time that was one of our executive producers on the film.
Okay.
So he got us he organised it for us and we were very lucky, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very unassuming, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you go into his house and you see like the animals.
So many animals. Yeah.
He has an air of, charm, like most, I'd imagine. I don't want to say it, but there's
that charm.
There's a charm.
Yeah.
There's a slight menace.
Yeah.
You kind of know who you're talking to. But, and again, he claims he has had no involvement with the bombings, Julia Cyphers or the Berkshire murders. So,
what is like the theory that people put forward if they say he's involved?
Yeah.
Or what do you put forward in your film?
So the theory is that there was a debt owed to him that others were sent to collect.
Okay.
For him.
Okay. And that things went south.
Yeah, and then things went south.
Is there any connection to Johnson County there? Or to assume that if someone was sent, maybe they had some kind of connection?
Yeah. I mean, the only theory with Johnson County is that, he probably knew he was probably had a wide reach, knew a lot of areas, was doing, I know that his dealings, took him to a lot of different places. So, yeah.
Is there anyone that you talked to in the film that buys into this theory very heavily? Because that was one I didn't run into a lot. I didn't run into a lot of people who thought that it was him.
So there's something towards the end of the film that,
okay.
Yeah.
So what is the fourth and final theory that you put forward?
So it's actually the fourth and the fifth kind of.
Oh, yeah. So the fourth one that is well known, and then you guys have a fifth one that's not so well known.
Yeah. Yes. So the eyewitness account is a gentleman called Alan Pruitt, who this is a pretty famous account, and I know that I think you looked into it.
Only because I talked to Jim Kramer.
Yes.
And this was the one, again, everyone I feel like had their pet theories, a lot of people, and this was Jim's that I know just thought about a lot was Alan Pruitt.
Did you interview Alan as well?
No.
Okay.
Because my story wasn't necessarily trying to figure out what happened. Yeah. Mine was like a short piece on what does it take from somebody who, was very young when it happened, had nothing to do with the original investigation. How do you come in and think about solving something like this?
Yeah.
So I didn't actually go and interview anyone other than some of the law enforcement agents.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So Alan Pruitt is a very interesting character. He's no longer alive. So he died shortly after we actually interviewed him.
Which is like incredible that you guys had that final interview with him.
Yeah. And he's, this story has obviously followed him throughout his whole life. So the story goes that him and another guy, they were looking for things to do. It was a Friday night. He just got his paycheck and they went to go to the Galaxy, which was the nightclub across the road, didn't get in, and then he was hungry, so they went to the Dunkin' Donuts, which was across the way from the Burger Chef. The guy that he was with went inside. Alan went outside because he claims that he felt sick and subsequently saw an orange van and two men loading. Well, he saw a little bit more than this, but essentially saw the kids being loaded into the van and then taken out of there. And so his story was then, so the police found him through he was doing prison time, and there was a guy called Jayne Friedt who was Jayne's brother, and Jimmy was a known kind of bad actor in the area at the time as well, and that him and Alan Pruitt got into some sort of argument in prison, and the prison staff alerted the police that Alan might know something, and then he was interviewed and questioned, and then through his questioning, his account of what he saw came out, and the account is that he recognised two individuals, Jeff Reed and Tim Willoughby.
And this is where it gets wild.
This is where it gets wild, and that they were putting the kids in the van, and that essentially Mark tried to fight back and was pushed up against the van and then maybe knocked out, and then they didn't know what to do. It had sort of escalated. So their idea was that they would take all of the kids and drive them out of there to buy time and work out what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's so wild about this is at this point, Tim Willoughby is a missing person, right?
Yeah.
Or thought to even be dead at that point.
Yeah.
But
so Tim and his girlfriend, Marianne Higginbotham, were missing since, I think it was June or July of 1978. And
so months at this point.
Yeah, so months, and that they were thought to be dead. But then Tim was seen that night, identified by Alan Pruitt with Jeff Reed.
And Marianne Higginbotham's, her body eventually gets found in a barrel in Indianapolis. To this day, Tim Willoughby has never been found.
Yes, correct. So Marianne's body was washed up on, is it White Lick Creek?
I think so.
Anyway,
Yes.
we know as much as each other. Yeah. And it was brought, and so, her body was found, but nothing about Tim Willoughby was ever seen again.
Yeah.
And so there was apparently a witness as well that saw Tim come into a Dairy Queen and he said to this person that he had a hideout somewhere in Florida, and, that he would never be found, and, that he was, and that was after that he was supposedly missing. And
in Alan Pruitt's, in this version of events, it's thought that maybe even Marianne Higginbotham was there. She was alive and everything.
Yeah.
And that maybe this is the reason that she's killed, and that Tim has to abscond if he's somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So his theory, or his story account goes over kind of 2 days. So the night of the robbery, of the murders, and then the next day where he claims that he was picked up in the same van, and Jeff Reed was driving, Tim Willoughby was there, and Marianne Higginbotham was in the back, and that she was sort of frantic and not making sense, and that they said to him, they picked him up from, I think it was either a White Castle or a Dairy
Something like that, yeah.
Something. And so then he was driven again into a forested area, and they said to him, do you want to come smoke some weed? And he got in, and then they drove him out to this forested area. And then apparently, I'm just giving the short version of this, that Marianne told him to run, and he ran out of there, and then shots were fired at him and he got away.
And nobody ever came back for him again.
Yeah, that was it, yeah. Have you heard that as well?
No, that was the first time when I.
So so that's all in his statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you like about it? What do you not like about it as far as theories go?
So I think if you look at it, right, so if you look at it from like a probability level, like what is most likely to have taken place, it just makes sense that, these two guys, apparently they were on a 72-hour bender on, whatever I don't know. I can't remember what the prevalent drug
was at the time. I can't remember either, but I think it was something specific.
Yeah, and that they, were driving past. They remembered that a debt was owed. They go in there thinking that they'll just, shake down, scare them, get the money, and they subsequently go there and things turn sour. We'd heard a lot of different people say that, Mark would protect Jayne and that there was some connection between them. And, even we've got an excerpt in the film from his father saying the same thing, that, he was Jayne's protector and stuff like that. So whether he rushed at them and then they put him up against the van, they, had to stop him and, things turned sour and then, things escalated from there. Like it just, to me, like broadly, this is what's maddening about Pruitt's statement is like that makes sense. Then when you go further into it and Tim Willoughby being
becomes more fantastical.
Yeah. And then especially the next day where Marianne's there, but it wasn't like the way that he describes it. It was like Marianne, but a zombie version or a different version of Marianne. And it's like, that's where it gets a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And that's what's sort of manny about it. And also like, the theory, his story changed over, the years and he backed away. And the things that he never backed away from, and even when we spoke to him, was that it was an orange van and it was Jayne Friedt and Tim Willoughby that he saw that night.
Do you think he actually saw something? Do you think he was involved in something and like inserted himself that way? What do you make of?
Well, that's the really interesting thing as well, because so Jim Kramer, who is an investigator that we worked very closely with, who had the case for 20 years, and this is, kind of his theory, he always said that Pruitt went home that night and told his mother that something big was going down at the Burger Chef and that there was a witness, an independent witness that was in the Dunkin' Donuts that saw Pruitt there. That's how they know he was definitely there that night, and that he was moving back and forward from the Dunkin' Donuts to behind the Burger Chef, like kind of like he was on lookout. So it's just so hard to know. Like,
is he the one of the people that was seen? Because we got two men that are seen, the bearded man and the clean-shaven man, and then nobody talks about seeing, or do they talk about seeing Pruitt?
Well, Pruitt was the one that gave that initial account about seeing the two men. So, nobody...
Oh, right. Yeah, okay.
Nobody else... Yeah, only that gentleman that was inside the Dunkin' Donuts said that he saw...
him walking. Okay.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah, so
those are the theories that for decades have kind of prevailed, have made their way to the surface. But in, like lifting up rocks, in talking to people, you guys uncovered something new after 40 years. After
we present the four main theories, we subsequently found a witness who, through researching Jayne Friedt and his time at the Snake Pit, which was I think it was on one of the turns at the...
so Indy has the Indy 500, and so this is Speedway is the area where that happens at, and the Snake Pit's like the big party area. Yeah,
and so Jayne Friedt was known there as the king of the Snake Pit and was this, larger-than-life personality there, and the sort of guy that if anybody had any trouble, they'd go to him and he'd sort it out. And so doing some digging into that, we were put onto somebody who had some details that has never come out before, and that's until now.
And that's really what you end on, is like, hey, they're even all these years later, because you get this person to talk to you. All these years later, there's people who are willing to speak. There are stories that haven't been told 100 times again, and new theories that should be explored.
Yeah.
And you guys kind of went down that road. So it was, I can't recommend it enough. And people should go watch it if you want to hear the new theory, because I'm not going to give it to you here. You need to watch the film.
So Adam and I would like to ask you a question.
Okay.
After watching our film and knowing so much about the case, what would you think was the most What theories did you think kind of worked for you? What was the most like, what did you feel like you thought most likely?
I think that, it's been so long since I've been in it. I still remember everything like it wasn't a ton of years ago. So I don't know the case as well as the two of you do. So I really was trusting that like, oh my God, they're way deeper in than I ever got. But I think that it's so easy to get swayed by the people who believe in it. And so I was really, what I was really interested in is like, I didn't spend hardly any time on the Speedway bombings. So I thought that was like a really interesting angle, that a lot of it felt fresh to me just because I didn't spend a ton of time there, because no one when I was doing it in 2019 was spending a lot of time there.
Yeah.
I really liked the Jim Cramer series. Again, I really like Jim Cramer, and he can sell you that when you're sitting at his kitchen table. He can sell it to you. But what I thought was so meaningful was not just hearing Cramer talk about it or reading a report where he's mentioned, but the fact that you guys actually got Alan Pruitt was really cool to see.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know if there was a lot that I would do differently, because I think that as of right now, I would say you guys are like the foremost experts on this case.
Yeah.
If you would have told me, I think before, how you guys were planning on doing the recreations and having them act, I'd been like, oh my God, like that could go wrong in like 20 different ways. But actually seeing the way you guys executed it was amazing. I feel like, knowing what I know about cases is like you go in and there's all this stuff I know you have to leave out. So not that I would do anything differently, but I want to know, what is the stuff that you guys left out?
It's such a good question as well. There's a lot. Like initially, we originally devised this as a series before COVID. That's what we were working towards. So, in terms of the research, there's so much that, and
you just didn't get to.
Yeah, well, that we just also for time.
Yeah, it didn't fit in.
And I can sit here and name, other theories like, the gun tosser. I don't know if you've heard that one. So a guy was pulled up almost exactly the same time by the police.
Oh, yes, I do know this one. Yeah.
So tossing a gun out of his car in a Burger Chef cup, that is incredible. But
But what can you do with it? Yeah.
Well, it just didn't fit, in terms of like where we would put it and how, anecdotally, Kirk's the guy that was going to pick Mark up, Kirk Thompson, and walk past and, initially found the door open and thought they were playing a trick on him. He walked past the guy being pulled up, so like we could have tied it in that way, but how do you do that? We didn't, so like that was one. And then, there's two brothers that lived in the same building as Mark that Mark was friends with that, have done, that were like potentially dealing drugs and, and they were kind of prevalent at one point. There's the 812 letters. I don't know.
I know. Actually, that's so I haven't gotten anyone reach out about Burger Chef in years. And just a couple of months ago, someone reached out about the 812 letters to me. And they were like, my mom's boyfriend, he says that he was the one who drove them out there that night. We think he wrote the 812, we think his brother wrote the 812 letters. And I was like, man, this is great, but like you got to tell someone who can do something about it. But because it was, so it was essentially someone wrote a letter. I don't know what's in the letter. Do you?
They did publish it in the paper. So basically what they did at the time was that they didn't have any other way of kind of like being able, this is pre-computers. Yeah. So as far as I know, and I might get it wrong, that the person that wrote a letter to the police would tear a $5 note, the serial number, and they would hold on to it, and then they'd stick the other half to the letter. And if the letter led to something, then they would get the reward if they could match the note back to the serial number.
Got it.
Yeah, so the 812, the reason it's called 812 is because that was
the last three. I knew it was the last couple numbers of something.
Yeah.
They said it was written in blue ink. Yeah. They really want to talk to the person who wrote it.
And it was basically a claim that they were there that night and they saw it, but they were like forcefully there.
Yeah.
Not under their own free will, and they saw the people that did it, and they were at the place. And so I think there was 2 letters that came and that, they never could
Figure out who wrote them.
Figure out who wrote them. And then the theory that we had was that it was the Sells brothers that wrote them, one of them being forcefully, or one wrote it for his brother that was made to be there. I mean, and then there's like, there's other, there was a guy that came back home one night with water and blood all over him, and and he had like blood and water in his van, and his wife, and I don't know what he said to his wife, but but then the story goes that his story was that he got into a bar fight and got blood on him. That was sort of looked into. Then, there's obviously like, again, without naming, but crime families in the area that, were quite prominent that potentially led back to it. So there was so many things. There was also an employee that was working at the restaurant at the time that apparently was going to be fired that night by Jayne that didn't turn up. He was supposed to be there that night, and that's the reason that Danny had to call his mum and say, can I stay back, because that person didn't turn up. And then apparently rang Jayne later, like almost at the time of closing, and then he's like, I've had car trouble, I can't come in. And he was like, do you still want me to come in? And Jayne was like, yeah, I want you to come in, because the theory is that she was going to fire him that night.
Did he come in?
Yeah, so he came in. So at the time when Ryan Kring got there first and then found the door open, and then this other guy
shows up
and is like, oh, I was supposed to be there that night, but I had car trouble. And then as soon as Brian rang the police, he kind of hightailed it out of there.
But I want to talk about what they're going to experience when they watch it, because you guys did something that I had never seen, where you recreated the entire Burger Chef.
Yeah.
And you actually had these 4 actors playing Danny and Ruth and Mark and Jayne. And the interesting part to me, it wasn't just like a recreation. They were an active part of the documentary, and they would actually pull the narrative along by talking about the theories. And it was like such like a strange experience to watch them talk about what happened, what could have happened to them.
Yeah.
And I thought it was super powerful. Like, again, I hadn't seen it done before. I thought you did it in a really good way. What made you guys want to do that?
Yeah. There was a few things. I mean, initially we wanted to give the kids agency in their story and not just have them as footnotes in this, in this story that involves, like as Teresa sort of says in the film, like we talk about potential suspects and perpetrators and we name them, and the kids are usually just left as a footnote in their own story. And so like doing all of the research and speaking to families and, like especially Teresa, where we had like Ruth formed as a character, like we knew who she was as a person, we had so much information that we just like, we thought, like it just wouldn't have done the story justice without having them. And so initially, COVID set us on this path. I won't lie, because we couldn't get back over to Indy and the world had shut down, and it was like, all of these things and production companies, and no one knew whether films were going to get back up. So we initially had the idea to build the restaurant and kind of look at it forensically, like the restaurant hadn't existed in 40 years.
Yeah.
Nobody had ever seen, nobody that we'd ever spoken to had ever seen a Burger Chef or what it looked like or where any of these things took place and what potentially would have happened in the office and where the safe was. And so we kind of like had that idea that we'd build it and document the build and look at it like that, and then potentially put them in there and have them, for lack of a better reference, Scooby-Doo the shit out of it because of that 7. We wanted it to be like, the kind of pitch after that point was like it was Linklater meets Zodiac, so it was like that 70s, sort of dazed and confused and see them as, their personalities and what they would have looked like together and the workplace relations and stuff like that. And then, and then kind of have them do the whole mystery and have them solve it.
What kind of undertaking was it to actually do that? I mean, truly, you had the entire restaurant, you had the uniforms, that seems like a massive undertaking. And how?
I know, it was, a lot of research and a lot of work. So I come from production design before this, and when that opportunity came up and we were going to do it, like, I think I spent maybe about a year just researching it on the internet, just finding pictures, I was, buying things on there was so much on eBay that you could buy, like cups and paraphernalia and
really?
So I ended up buying a lot. Like, I was like the burger chef guy.
I was just gonna say, you're like now the world's like foremost leader in burger chef with like your own collection.
I seriously think I probably know the most one of the most in the world about what a burger chef.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I knew like the different, because it changed a lot as well over that period in terms of branding and stuff. So like the one that we had in 78 was the orange and brown striped uniforms, which had only just come in at that time. Before that, they were like blue and white. And then eventually I found a guy on eBay that was selling a deceased estate that had the uniform still in packets, that I ended up buying them off him like one at a time. And then eventually we sort of became friends, and he was like, "What are you doing with these things in Australia?"
This could have a different ending.
Yeah. And then I sort of explained it to him, and then we ended up buying everything that he had, like boxes of it, so that the costume designers
were totally legit.
Yeah. So there was no way to replicate that uniform, I found out as well. They couldn't replicate that fabric because it was so...
Probably 1978 would like go up in flames with like the like thought of a cigarette.
It's completely synthetic. As soon as you go near a naked flame, you're like up. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And then the only thing that we couldn't buy were the hats. Or we did buy one of those like paper hats that the boys would wear, and then replicated that. And then the girls' hats we had to make out of cutting up a uniform. But we were able to find like some pretty good pictures on the internet of there was two styles. So there was a peaked one, and then there was one that was like a beret. And then, just, Ginger, for example, I'd like Ginger, who used to work at the restaurant at the time, I'd ask her questions about where was this and what did the drive, and she would draw it for me. And like,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I worked with our production designer, a guy called Jonah Booth-Remmers, who is incredible. And we were able to kind of get all of the details in there, like nothing else. Like, I've never seen anything else.
Was this the most expensive undertaking in the world? It sounds like it.
It was one set. So initially, what they would want to do with a film is shoot in a studio. So they'd do the interior in a studio, because then you can control the lighting, move walls if you need to and stuff like that. But then we ended up finding this building in Adelaide in Australia that geography-wise was almost perfect to what the actual restaurant on Johnson
really?
County. Yeah. And it had another restaurant, like another building that was sort of like, kind of a few feet away.
For the Duncan?
Yeah. And they were both on sort of like, and it had like essentially a parking lot area.
Wow, how perfect.
Yeah. So we put an offer. So that building was about to be knocked down, and it was an abandoned Chinese restaurant. And so then we ended up putting in an offer to the what do you call it? The agent not to sell it and give it to us for 3 weeks. The building was then sort of subsequently sold, and then they made the offer to the people that bought it to not knock it down. And so then we had carte blanche to like go in and knock down walls and do whatever we needed to, because when they're done, when you were done, it just got... That was it.
Oh my.
Yeah. So then we ended up getting an engineer and going in there, and the building was subdivided. So they needed the kind of subdivision walls to sort of still be there somehow. But then we ended up like knocking it down and making it one structure with the counter, and sort of the counter had like sort of could hold it up. And then we sort of knocked down the front of it and built the big windows and everything. But the problem was that it was on a main road. So, you could kind of hear the sound of cars. So we sort of, we shot at night. So it was like 4.
Which was perfect anyway.
Yeah. Just hard for like a crew.
Life?
And a really young cast. And so we ended up, instead of doing the studio, we did inside and outside all in the one area. So we were, able to build it as a film set almost exactly the same as what it would have been in 1978.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in rebuilding everything, did you also rebuild the stuff that was outside as well? Because it's so funny. I literally remember watching and seeing the Dunkin' sign, seeing the Burger Chef sign, and I'm like, did you actually rebuild the signs?
So it was a bit of a point of contention early on. So they were going to do it digitally in post and build the Burger Chef sign. And apparently I was pretty adamant that I wasn't going to move forward with the film if we didn't.
What do you mean apparently?
Were
you not there for it?
I think I had it wasn't my finest moment. I think I had some sort of tantrum about building the sign. So what's interesting about it is that we had to get permission from Hardee's owned the copyright of Burger Chef.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's actually owned, they bought it out in I think it was the late 80s.
Okay.
And then, Burger Chef was sort of gone by the 90s. But when we were researching it, we found out that Hardee's still owned the IP.
Okay.
And so we had to get permission from Hardee's to be able to use it. And that was a whole process in itself because obviously, it's a fairly dark thing to have happened.
Yeah, but it's not like they're still out there making Burger Chefs.
Yeah. But I think the reason that they do is so that they can kind of, make T-shirts and they don't want anybody just kind of doing that. So anyway, we worked very closely with them and there was definitely guidelines that we could and couldn't do with it. But then with the sign, we only kind of got it really over the line that we had permission to use it after we were building everything, which is crazy. So
what does it ask for? Forgiveness, not permission?
Yeah.
that was the motto?
It was down to the wire and it was so nerve-wracking that, that whether we were going to be able to use, we were literally building signs that were 15
Massive.
feet tall, So Anna ended up agreeing to do the sign, and what the sign entailed was building the whole the structure, which was the light box and then the pole, and it was about 15 feet and it lit up, and so essentially I had to get a crane, drill into the ground, pour concrete, put the sign up for 3 weeks and then knock it down. And
Did you keep any part of it?
So the sign itself actually exists. The distributor is this, interesting guy that lives in Melbourne who has a massive house and he's got all this eclectic shit and so you would love his house. There's so much true crime stuff there.
Wait.
It's almost done like a museum. He invited me there to have a look and he's kept the sign and the Burger Chef letters, so they're at his house because we didn't really
know what else to do with them.
What do you do with it?
Wait, so this guy just has a true crime museum in his house, basically?
He's got a bit of everything. He's really into sort of cultural history. So each room is kind of dedicated to a different sort of thing. And so he'll have he's got a Beatles room, where he's got Beatles memorabilia, autographs, and then he's got a room dedicated to some history or he's got a room that's dedicated to, the history of pornography and,
Is it just does he have tickets to walk through his museum?
You have to get
just for him?
Yeah, it's just his thing. He's just kind of...
Wait, how big was the sign?
The sign is 15 feet tall, I think.
Where is it in his house?
It's in the garage. I didn't see it on display, but there's sort of talk that we're going to bring it to the premiere in Melbourne and kind of put it up. So
that would be really cool.
I hope that happens. Yeah.
I do too. I do too. What did everyone in town think? Did they think that this restaurant called Burger Chef was popping up and then disappeared 3 days later?
So they literally thought it was a new restaurant and they were getting really excited and people were lining up trying to come in.
Shut up.
Yeah, even though we had fences around it and all that sort of thing, they thought, oh my God, this is so cool. There's a new burger restaurant and a donut shop. Oh my God, it's the double whammy. And so people were trying to come in and then also it was on the radio that there was a new burger place.
No way.
In the area. And then they found out that it was a film and then it was on, then they were oh no, it's not. It's a film set. And so there was buzz around it in that way.
We have so many Australian crime junkies, so they're going to love that. But they're not going to... They might recognize people in the film because all the actors were Australian, right? Even though I did not know that because they did their Indiana dialect very well.
Yeah. I mean, we were so lucky to get, thank you for that, by the way, but we were so lucky to get these actors just on the way to, hitting big. So they're all Australian and New Zealand. And we had an amazing dialect coach that, kind of did the research and, nailed indie, Midwest.
Which I would love to just hear like what they said about our dialect.
Specific. Yeah, so specific. And some of the research was, I think we ended up like contacting the library and finding they had police, fire and ambulance phone calls that they kept.
Ah.
And then also race, like all of the race calls from like the different, from over the years. So we sort of had that as well. But yeah, I mean, the actors just did an incredible job because like nobody, I had a friend that's American and he was like.
I didn't know. I had no idea.
It was like,
and I knew you guys had been here so much that I was like, oh, they must have just like, I don't know why. I just thought you did this here.
I mean, that was such a great young cast. And we were also lucky with one of our actors, Davy, her mum is an amazing dramaturg. So we were lucky enough because she was under 15, she had to be accompanied by a guardian. So we were lucky enough to have her as well. So she worked really closely with us. And, we had the time before to kind of really delve into it and get them to bond and, do sort of like a lot of, like work together and stuff like that to really form the relationships and the dynamics and how, because they weren't necessarily friends, but they were co-workers and what was the dynamics and how well did they know each other outside of work. So like we really kind of had the time to do that as well and delve into it, which was really good.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because you guys came back, you had a premiere actually here in the place that it happened. What was the reception?
It was really good. So we always wanted to bring it to the families and people that were involved in the case. We were tossing up like kind of, initially whether to send links. So, like someone like Teresa could watch it, with her family and stuff like that, which we did do. But then luckily enough, she agreed to come along. And we always wanted to make a thing of it and an event and bring it to everybody here and present it and and be there and have the discussion. And, we the film is essentially a presentation of everything that we learnt, that these are the theories. This is what, we have, we're presenting it as our research kind of thing. And so we were really open and we wanted to have the discussion and, we had a Q&A afterwards. We were really lucky that, we had it moderated by local news reporter and everybody, that came along that was in the film and we were able to talk about it. And, people in the crowd were very enthusiastic and one guy even got up and, knew Jayne Friedt and had so much to say and almost took over the Q&A. So it was really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that wasn't happy or it wasn't what they expected? It's so hard, I know, with true crime cases.
Yeah.
Pleasing everyone's almost impossible.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely chatter in the groups about people that aren't happy that certain people were named in the film or, things were used. But, I mean, again, like, we presented what we've learnt in, like the best way that we felt we could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been out for how long now while we're recording this?
It came out on the 20th of June here. So
for almost a month.
Yeah.
Has there been a lot of people coming to you afterwards? Like, I mean, again, I know the stuff that you can kick up while you're just like talking to people around town, and now this has a global stage.
Yeah.
Have you been getting information since then? Has anything changed? Have there been new tips?
There has been, and people definitely come forward. Not all of it ends up being, relevant. Yeah. But we usually will, point them in the direction of, the right people to go to, whether it be, the ISP or, we'll filter it through so we can get it, and everything along the way we've done the same. So anybody.
Do you really view yourself at this point like you're like, the tips are great, we're going to pass them on, but we're moving on to new projects? Or are you always going to continue to follow up on those? Like, are you?
It's such a good question. I don't think you can ever really get this out of you.
Yeah.
Like, I think that, it will be part of us forever. And, you know, and certainly if people come forward, we'll always give them the time and also pass it on if need be. So, you know, I mean, we're both working on different things and we've got our next projects as well. But, you know, like this is still our, you know, baby and our obsession and our first love. So, yeah.
What is next for you both?
Adam's working on a documentary in Australia that's a pretty well-known kind of case that's happening out there. And I'm looking at doing, and we've got a few projects together and then separate, and I'm looking at doing something that's pretty scripted, but sort of involves a lot of this stuff that I'm into as well. That's very Crime Junkie-esque.
Love it.
I can't get it out of me. So, yeah. Do
you guys think you'll do another documentary, or like what was the takeaway from this? It's like, yes, we would love to do this again, or oh my God, this consumed our lives and one is enough and we'll be obsessed with this case forever?
I mean, we love it and we'd never say no. We love, you know, we definitely want to do both.
Yeah.
We love scripted and we love doc. Yeah. So, you know, we've got a few things as well that we're working on, that a documentary as well. So, yeah, we're here. You know, we're still going, and you know, we'd always like to do it somewhat differently. You know, I think that what we were lucky with this one was that we got to do it, you know, a little bit differently, and it had a very different angle. So, you know, we'd definitely like to kind of hone our skills and do it again.
Remind people where they can go watch this.
Yeah. So in the States, it's on at the moment. It's on Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime, and on demand. And then in Australia, it will be out on Apple TV, Amazon, and on demand and limited theatrical from the 7th of August, and then New Zealand Film Festival on the 10th of August.
There is, again, we talked about a lot of the theories, but there is new information, a new theory at the end. People need to go watch. And I'm not going to spoil it either, but I especially love the way that you guys did the ending. It was talking about like making it, really bringing it home, making the kids real. It was like such a beautiful, touching ending. So make sure if you're in the US, you can go watch it now, Apple TV Plus, Amazon Prime. And if you're in Australia, it's coming out very soon. August 7th, Apple TV Plus and Prime. Make sure you go watch.
I just want to say as well that if there's anything, any tips or any info that people have, you know, we'd love them to come forward, and we can either pass it on to authorities or they can go straight to the authorities with any promising leads or information. We'd encourage anyone to come forward.
What would be the best way to get in touch with you if they wanted to talk about something?
Instagram.
Instagram?
Instagram or Facebook.
Perfect. And then we'll put the information for the Indiana State Police who have the case in the show notes. Don't forget to follow this show and add it to your library. And don't forget to follow Crime Junkie. We have a brand new episode of Crime Junkie AF the last Friday of every month. But if you can't wait till then, you can head to Crime Junkie Radio on SiriusXM in their app for your 24/7 true crime fix. And you can follow me, Ashley Flowers, on Instagram at Ashley Flowers. And you can follow me at Ashley Flowers Crime Junkie on TikTok. Stick around. We're going to be playing you a special clip from the Speedway Murders right after this. I will see you right back here next month.
The fact that no one has been held responsible burns a hole right through me.
Usually when I start having nightmares, it's getting colder and it's just my heart just sinks. And I remember that she's gone.
November 17th, 1978, 4 employees of the Burger Chef restaurant in Speedway, Indiana were abducted. 2 days later, on Sunday afternoon, a person found their bodies in rural Johnson County, Indiana, where they had been murdered. Ruth and Danny were both shot, face down, execution style. Jayne was stabbed twice in the chest. And then Mark was beaten.
The bodies of Jayne Friedt, Mark Flemmonds, Daniel R. Davis,
and Ruth Shelton have been discovered late this afternoon in Johnson County.
The crime still remains unsolved.
1978, just hours after closing time, 4 employees, ages 16 to 20,
they were found murdered a few days later in Johnson County.
No one has been charged with a
Talk
crime.
about one of the most infamous crimes in state history.
Somewhere, somebody knows what happened.